Well, welcome everyone to our final structured session of the afternoon. The benefit of having a virtual conference is that we can bring people in from all over the world. So our final presentation is coming to us from Australia. The title of the presentation is the Neighbourhood Justice Centre in Melbourne, Australia, and I will introduce Alycia Ashcroft to start the presentation. Thank you, Alycia.
As Linda mentioned, I'm Alycia Ashcroft and I'm the Manager of Education and Public Programs at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, which I and the panel will refer to as the NJC throughout the presentation. Thanks so much to everyone for coming today. In this session, we hope the things that you'll take away are the importance of engaging with community in the design process, to be flexible within the design process, and future-proofing of the design for adaptability. The community are the people we are there to serve and support. While it doesn't always appear from the outside, justice is dynamic. A well-functioning society or community must have a well-functioning justice system. It is about the people it serves, not the administration. The NJC opened in 2007 and is the first and currently the only community justice centre in Australia. We are based in the state of Victoria, in the city of Melbourne, in a suburb called Collingwood. And our jurisdiction covers the local government area known as the City of Yarra Council, which is highlighted on this slide here. We see ourselves as a one-stop justice shop, and in this building, we house a courtroom, a team of community support services, lawyers, corrections, and specialist teams who focus on crime prevention, innovation, and education. Please welcome the panel today. So I have with me today Rachel Powning, who is the NJC's General Manager and has served as in that position for 3 years. Rachel's previously worked in international development, local government and the community sector. Rachel is a strong advocate for local community self-determination and for the role of justice in responding to the causes of offending. Dr. Cameron Wallace is the manager of the NJC's social service providers, the client services team. He and his team provide clients who are going through the court system and members of the local community with wraparound treatment and support. Cameron works closely with the magistrate, community correctional services, court administrators, Victoria Police, the legal profession, and agencies across justice and community. Cameron has been with the NJC since day one in 2007 and is passionate about community justice. Kwan is the Neighbourhood Justice Officer at the NJC. She has a background in criminology and psychology. She has 10 years of experience prior to her current unique role. Kwan has worked in various positions within community correctional services. She is an advocate for crime prevention and has experience working with complex and high-risk individuals. Welcome to the stage today. So we will dive right in. As I mentioned just a moment ago, the NJC opened in 2007. Rachel, can you please discuss more about the creation of the centre?
Yes, thank you, Alycia, and good afternoon, everyone. It's terrific to be here and thank you for having us. So yes, as a community justice centre, the NJC was established during a time of significant reform, judicial reform in the state of Victoria here in Australia. And the building design certainly reflects that reform. So in Victoria at the time, it was not only in the justice sector that there was reform, but also in other parts of government. So there was a general trend towards increased accessibility in terms of decision making and a much stronger focus on the client. And as Alicia's already said, the centre is located in an inner city area. It's an area with a high proportion of government housing and at the time a higher than average crime rate at the time it was established, and also a very diverse community, including in terms of income, education levels, and a high population of a refugee background. So this, as we'll see soon in the illustrations we have, the centre design really does speak to the value of engaging with the community, and it really speaks to a commitment to a transparency of justice. And at the time, the centre was created with very strong government support and community support, but there was some scepticism in the judicial community. And so it was, yes, it was very experimental at the time for Victoria.
Sorry about my slide hiccup a moment ago. And I'll just go to Cameron now. You were actually aware of some of the initial discussions around the location. Can you talk a little bit more about why this spot was chosen?
Thanks, Alycia, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to present today. So in 2005, 2006, so prior to the launch of the centre, obviously government was looking towards how it is that it would create Australia's first community justice centre. And there are a series of sites that were identified by government as being potentially viable options for that. Now, one of the most rudimentary kind of considerations in that was, where is there currently an unused and available government asset, which led the government to really have a look at how it is that it could reinvest in local communities, how it is that it could repurpose a current building that was owned by them to fit this need that we had. And one of the things that was very clear about the site that eventually became the NJC was that this was a building that actually had a natural position in its local community. The building that we currently occupy, that we're lucky enough to occupy, in its history has been the local courthouse previously, the local police station. It was a technical college in its most recent incarnation, where it provided training opportunities for local community to engage in trades within the local area. And part of what was considered by government within that was, where is a place within community justice for this building to actually build on that previous narrative that it had with its local community? So what that meant for us was that, particularly from an architectural perspective, we were looking at repurposing something that already existed in the city of Yarra. It was easier to get access to. It was literally quite across the road from one of the largest public housing estates, and the city of Yarra has the highest concentration of public housing within the state of Victoria. So really the site was arrived at really by the fact that it was easy to access. It sat in the kind of nest of a locally well-furnished and well-considered service sector, and again had a natural history in its own environment, where people had turned to this building and what it occupied in the past to be that central kind of lightning rod position for the local community to gain access to training and local kind of engagement with government.
Kwan, do you want to just add in something around the context of what surrounds the centre and how we're allowed to operate there as a court?
Yes, thanks, Alycia, and hi, everyone. So what Cameron and Rachel said was really important in terms of consideration for the location of the NJC. But one thing that it really was taken into consideration is how the site selection supported the function and operation of the court. As Cameron mentioned, the NJC is opposite quite a number of housing estate, public housing. And the NJC is actually also located next to a primary school. It's, we have a lot of local facility for young families around the area. And there's also a childcare centre a couple of blocks down the road. For us, that is a possible location because the NJC legislation stipulated specifically that our court does not deal with sexual offending against children. However, in other mainstream court where sexual offending are regularly heard, this site probably wouldn't have been an appropriate location, as it will constitute a significant organisational risk.
Thank you. We'll move on to a little bit more around that design. So we talk about at the NJC that the design is really user-centred. So the perspective of this client was really in the mind of the architects at the time. Rachel, I'll go to you first. Who is the client and what are the features that showcase this?
Yes, so we use the term client very broadly, of course. So clients could be people from the general community, client could be an offender and a victim of crime, or anyone coming into the centre to use the therapeutic services or the allied health services that we have operating. Clients of the centre are also the staff and the judiciary that use the centre. And in response to that, the building has really been designed with a one-size-fits-all, if you like, in that it demonstrates very good fundamental design principles that meet the needs of a broad spectrum of people. And it's definitely designed to make all clients experience a positive and personalised experience. So clients feel empowered when in the centre. And some of the features are the welcoming entry points. Alycia, you're moving through the slides, great. Welcoming entry points. The centre is also a gallery for community artwork, so we have a rotating art program and people can come in and have a look at the art program. We have a community cafe on site. The security team play a role in providing security, but also a concierge function. We have a children's room, which you saw there. We have a number of welcoming outdoor spaces. And as you can see from the photographs, the centre, of course, has very good natural light, very strong sight lines across the centre. The acoustics are calming and there's a use of a lot of natural finishes.
And Rachel, you did just mention then security. I might throw to Cameron to expand on some of the aspects of our dynamic and concierge security system.
Thanks, Alycia. One of the things that the Neighbourhood Justice Centre represents in terms of the Victorian and national landscape of justice is quite a significant departure from the model of security that is used in other court sites and complexes around the country. We are the only court within Australia that does not maintain airport-style security. So there are no X-ray machines, there are no metal detectors, and that was quite a deliberate decision on behalf of both government and the architectural firm that underpinned the building internally of the NJC, because it was about considering what that initial relationship is like. How is it that we create dynamics through architecture, and how is it that we create dynamics through our initial engagement with the multifaceted clients that do attend at the NJC? And that had quite significant ramifications for the concept of security within the building. The NJC, in terms of our kind of nomenclature, disproportionately has high risk reoffending clients. We have high and moderate risk. We are not a soft on crime option, and we are not an option that necessarily doesn't deal with complexity. But part of the decision that we had to make was about, well, how will we create that dynamic, and how will security and the maintenance of security as a concept across the building actually kind of manifest itself in practice? In essence, from an architectural perspective, what that meant, and as Rachel talked about, we maintain line of sight. We have built in relatively invisible security parameters within the building that unless you kind of knew their function, you wouldn't be clear about the security that they maintain. Our security is proactive in that we approach people and we speak with people. We seek to ensure that we maintain amenity within the space by being able to see across the entirety of it, and that our response to any form of disturbance or difficulty really is more about an engagement process rather than a more traditional law and order response to security. There are definitely architectural features that fit within that space. So as you can see here from this slide, we have our reception desk. It is deliberately built at a height and at an angle coming out, which actually increases the security for our reception staff, and the same thing is mimicked at our registry desk. But what we were clear about as kind of the initial cohort coming in, and every person who has then engaged and worked at the NJC, is that security is a dynamic process for us. We are all committed to how it is that we engage with our process. We don't disavow safety to the architecture and the physical structure of the place. And Kwan will speak to matters of that in terms of when we talk about the courtroom particularly. But in terms of how it is that we maintain this space as being a safe, welcoming environment for all community members. And one of the things that we do talk about is that it's about 400 to 500 people per month that attend the centre that have nothing to do with the court. This is a community facility. This is a community resource. So we need to maintain the sanctity and the respect of this place through things other than its physical structure by the maintenance of our processes of working in with that material. And again, as we go through, we'll talk about other entrances and other aspects of the centre that do assist us in being able to maintain this as a safe, secure place for all NJC attendees.
It's just a picture of the registry desk before I move on. As Cameron mentioned, Kwan, would you be able to touch on, the design of the courtroom itself?
Yes, thanks, Alycia. So nearly every court in Australia, it's entered through timber doors, and you cannot see through inside the courtroom who's in the courtroom, what's happening, which can be extremely unnerving for our clients who, regardless of their experience with court. The doors to the NJC, however, have floor-to-ceiling glass through which clients and legal representatives can observe the magistrate proceedings and who's in the public gallery. This level of transparency prepares people to enter an environment that is otherwise sealed and wholly foreign to them. Our court does not hear matters that require a closed court. Notwithstanding this, the use of the glass highlight the principle that justice must not only be done, but it needs to be seen to be done. The two large, you will be able to see that there's a lot of large windows surrounding the courtroom. It offers view over the rooftop. You can see across the road to the school. You can look into the street, which is really unusual, as for most other courts, you can only see natural light in the magistrate chambers. Bringing the outside world into the courtroom emphasize that the space is part of ordinary life, and again highlight the principle that we are one with the community. In other Victorian courts, the bench where the magistrate sits is usually 3 steps up. At the NJC, however, the bench is at room level, except for 1 step up to the magistrate's chair. The idea is that the magistrate is seeing eye to eye with the litigants.
Sorry, Kwan, I was just going to ask you to just expand on how this might impact the way people actually behave when they're in the room.
Yeah, sure. At the NJC, there's nothing that separates a defendant from the courtroom, as you can observe in this picture, apart from the dock. Unlike other courts in Victoria, where there's often glass or metal poles that separate the defendant from the rest of the people in the court. If clients are not in custody, the defendant would sit at the bar table, usually along with their lawyer and police prosecutors, rather than in the gallery as per practice in other mainstream court. This helps create a sense that they're very much part of the justice process and justice are being done with them rather than to them. And they are just as accountable to the proceeding as any other parties. The magistrate would often invite the defendant to speak during the proceedings. You can see that there's a door behind the dock on the far right. It is a lift behind that door that leads to the custody area on ground floor. We have 2 cells that hold people in custody and a maximum of 2 people in each cells. So it's a little cramped, to be honest. The area is not big. However, what's different from other court is that in our cells, you can still see the natural skyline from inside the cells, whereas in other court, the cells are usually a very dark and grim area. Again, this is to reinforce the idea that even though the defendant has committed a crime, they're still pretty much part of the community and should be assisted to be reintegrated.
Thank you, Kwan. I've just moved to a photo of the outdoor area. Would you mind just talking a little bit about how this impacts your interactions with clients and how staff might use the area, Kwan?
Yeah, sure. We actually have two internal outdoor areas within the building. One is the balcony on court floor that you're looking at now, and the other one is the courtyard located on the ground level. These are actually one of the most important spaces in the building, as bringing in a bit of the outside world and greenery into the space really do help soothe and contain people's anxiety. There's quite a few functions to the space. It can serve as the second waiting room for those attending court. Client can use it as a smoking area, and they can also use this space to have appointments with staff, particularly for those clients who are quite volatile. It's an open space where security can easily observe what's happening, and the client generally feels calmer as they could kind of, move around, smoke while they have an appointment. And is also a great space to de-escalate situation. It's inevitable that some clients get really worked up during court or an appointment, and often they ask to take a moment to calm down in the courtyard or the balcony before coming back to debrief with staff. It's really helpful to have a space to contain that situation rather than having a person who's really emotionally heightened walking back out in the community. In terms of how staff use this space, in other courts, often the building is designed to separate staff and clients as much as possible. At the NJC, staff, magistrates, clients, and visitors all share the same space. And the internal courtyard and balcony are a good example of that. If staff wanted to have a smoke break, this is the space that they would share with client. For the centre to achieve its objective, it really needs to be understood as part of the community, not separated from it. Over time, what we observe is that the community also sees this space as their own, and they sees it as a safe space for them. We have clients who might just be having a rough day and would come in and sit in the balcony to just debrief themselves. These also help create a sense of ownership and respect for this space. They hold each other accountable, and they're very respectful of the facility because it is their resources.
Thank you, Kwan. I might ask Rachel now. Can you, I guess Kwan's spoken a lot about the client and that experience of being in the building. Could you expand on what that's like as well for community and staff alike?
Yes, it is, we hope, predominantly a really positive experience to be in the building, and Kwan's really articulated well the ownership that the community have over their facility. And I think that plays out every day when we see the way people behave when they come into the centre. So as we've talked about, it is a calming environment, and the centre's design is quite modest. In fact, you can see in the photograph behind Alycia now that it's quite a plain building on the exterior, and so one can walk past and not even notice it is there. So that is part of ensuring that people don't feel intimidated by the building and being inside the building. I think that's a really positive aspect to the design. And what we do know, of course, is that when clients feel engaged in a positive way, the decisions made in a building are more likely to be complied with. So that's that concept of procedural justice. We know there is a lot of evidence speaking to the point that compliance is improved if court users feel they are treated fairly and with respect. And the experience of being in the building certainly supports this. We talk about the fact that people will act the way they are treated, of course. The building design also seeks to really normalise that experience of being in the justice system, taking part in the justice system, because whilst many of our offenders and clients are in the justice system for long periods, there are many people that come in and out of the justice system, and in fact it touches all of our lives. There's really not one of us that doesn't have some exposure to the justice system throughout our lives.
Thanks, Rachel. Cameron, do you have anything to add to that, maybe around how crime prevention through environmental design impacts the centre and the clients and community.
Thanks for that, Alycia. Just before stepping to that, there is actually, I think, one thing to really draw attention to, and it is the picture behind Alycia. That the Neighbourhood Justice Centre or community justice, in my opinion, tends to have a humility attached to how it is that it approaches the work that it does. In Victoria, we would say that in terms of our large-scale justice investments around new courts, they are institutions, and they are often institutions of a grand nature. They are things that dominate their landscape. For example, one of the courts recently built by Court Services Victoria is the tallest building in the country town that it exists in. And in a sense, it dominates that landscape. Whereas community justice, and I draw attention also to kind of Red Hook in relation to this, has a humility of kind of sitting within its local environment and actually being quite powerful without having to necessarily assert its position. And I think there is something within that from an architectural perspective that I'm actually really glad working in this building for a long time, that it actually was one that we repurposed something that previously had a place in its environment, and we didn't seek to change that. We sought to actually capitalise on that. In terms of the environmental features that kind of talk about our capacity to affect people's behaviour and change behaviour from what courts traditionally would see, part of what we've obviously talked about is the use of line of sight, not adopting a traditional court aspect, but also the use of natural light and people understanding the passage of time whilst they're in the building. I don't know if it's just a uniquely Victorian position, but sometimes your day in court is quite literally your entire day in court. And the ability to actually still be able to access outside spaces, to get a level of amenity, to be able to get food, nourishment, water, coffee without leaving the court complex is actually quite fundamental. And as I think as Kwan said really articulately before, clients and the community see this as being their resource, and they treat it as if it's their resource. They treat it in a way and they behave in a way within it that is about them having a respect and regard for it that they expect us to reciprocate. And one of the things that's probably the less glamorous component of this, and in terms of our ability to change people's behaviour, is that we need to keep it in what we call good nick, or what I call good nick. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be looked after because the amenity affects how people behave. Cracked walls, torn up carpet, a whole range of things in terms of a broken windows approach actually tends to affect people's behaviour negatively. What we do in terms of maintaining the building, maintaining our ability to kind of maximise our vision of it and to see it, allows us to ensure that people actually de-escalate their behaviour, that actually we are able to kind of affect that people feel more comfortable and confident in a space that is making really significant decisions about their future and their lives. As Kwan said, we have two fully functioning cells. We have people coming in and out of custody. You know, this is about a place where really important decisions are made. And my usual thing that I love to draw attention to, and it is again just behind Alicia's head, architecturally, our architect has thicker glass behind the magistrate, but thinner glass to the left of the magistrate, so that he actually can't hear traffic-based noise in the road behind him, but he can hear the school next to him. And in that courtroom, to be able to hear the community is not a distraction, it's a reminder of who we're actually there to serve and what we're actually there to do. To see the community sitting in that space constantly tells us, you are not here for you, you're actually here for us. And again, that's the way in which we kind of get people to kind of think about, well, how will you behave in this space that is equally owned by you as it is equally owned by us? Thanks, Alycia.
Thank you. So, Rachel, what we might move to now is how the centre has actually adapted over time. So what elements have changed and what's been, adapted since the beginning to now?
Sure. So as we've said, the centre was established in 2007. They're given, as a result of the popularity of services being engaged with the centre and wanting to be based at the centre, there was an initial expansion in 2012. And then more recently, actually 2020, last year, we did a refurbishment of the staff floor, which is on the second level of the building. And you can see that staffing area here. And you can see that, of course, there is that continued dedication to natural light, greenery, etc., good acoustics. And what we have here on this level is all of the staff, almost all of the staff, apart from those people in the reception area on the ground floor, based on one level, which allows for clear communication and learning opportunities. within the staff. We have our senior lawyers on this level. We have the police prosecution team, correction services, and a whole range of other service staff working together. So that we haven't actually been able to use that floor because of COVID. And of course, what we'll find now is that we probably have a lot more space than we need, given that a lot of people will continue to work remotely, at least part-time. But that's okay, we'll adapt as we go because we're pretty good at adapting. And then the other thing that I wanted to share with you was some changes as a result of moving all our staff up to that level that I've just spoken about. We were able to create what we call our AFM space. So AFM is affected family member. It's a term we use here. And affected family members are those people that are coming into the court because they have a family violence matter being heard. So this space that we've created here is for the victim survivors of family violence, predominantly women and children using that space. Again, we haven't been able to use it as much as we'd like to because of COVID. A lot of our work has been heard on, a lot of the court's work, of course, has been heard online. But during breaks between lockdowns, we have been able to have people in and use it for community training and other purposes. So I think this, certainly the thing about this is that it's a really great example of innovation and change at the NJC and how we've adapted to change within the court system over time.
What I was just going to say, Rachel, is how, and I know you mentioned that due to COVID, obviously we haven't been able to use it as much, but in the times we have been able to use it, how has this new space actually impacted the centre and how it works?
Yeah, sure. So the space is certainly focused on comfort for the users of the space. So we've got soothing music, of course, pictures, etc. Again, the commitment to natural light. There's coffee facilities, there's children's play equipment, and but really the main impact of the centre, the space and the way that we've set it up is that it really reinforces the client focus of the centre and the way we work. So it's reinforced that change process that the staff come into the client rather than the client moving around parts of the building to meet staff at locations convenient for them. So for example, it's our intention that when we're able to use this space, hopefully next year when we're out of lockdown here and things return to some sort of normal, it's our intention that lawyers will visit clients in that space. The court registry staff will visit clients, family violence support practitioners will visit clients. So really it does challenge the traditional assumption that the client has to go where the services are in a building. When we were designing it and setting it up and talking to the lawyers about how it could work, we really did have to resist that traditional assumption that clients want to be set aside in a private room and isolated. It was the lawyers particularly that were interested in maintaining that client confidentiality, of course, and for them to maintain that meant that there had to be separate and isolated meeting rooms. So we really had to work to talk to them about how we could achieve that balance without setting up private rooms, because what we believe is that the clients, while certainly they do value their privacy, what's more important to them is that particularly family violence victim survivors and their children, more concerned about being in a space which makes them feel valued, less alone and isolated than privacy. So we're trying to balance those two things, and the space is experimental at the moment. So we're hoping to get some more funding in the near future to make it a more permanent arrangement, but certainly we've set it up with those principles in mind.
And I might go to Cameron now. What is your take of the impact of this space and how it's being used?
And I think there's a series of things that sit within both the impact, but also in terms of the points that Rachel has made. And one of the points I kind of think to be really clear about is that, Alycia, are you able to go back a slide for a second?
Yeah.
This is me throwing in things into disarray. So if you actually kind of observe this space, what you'll see here really is three individual spaces. You've got the open plan space that sits in front of us in this, and off to the door on the left-hand side with the blue square, the blue circle on it, is a private interview room. To the back behind the glass panel is a private interview room. What we did and what Rachel kind of talked about in holding the angst of the lawyers is being clear with them that what we're trying to build is a space that has amenity, but also the capacity to step away to confidentiality when needed. And one of the things I think in terms of legal practitioners is they often consider that the 5 minutes that they may spend with a client represents the sum totality of that person's experience on the day. Now, what this space allows us to do is to actually have people move in and out of this. So you can move into a confidential space and you can have a conversation with your legal representative. And then once that is done, go back to a safe that is space, that is safe, secure, and has a level of amenity attached to it. And that in a way, it's kind of traditional with the NJC. What Rachel particularly had to spearhead in relation to this was holding the angst of the traditional model. And I just want to build it the way that it's all built. And that's about small interview rooms that dictate our capacity and our numbers. But what this space kind of represents and how we use it is about having it as being multifunctional. And whilst we use it as a space for victim survivors on the days that we list those matters, other days of the week it's used by the local community as a training room. Other days of the week it has rows of tables in it where we are using it to actually provide education, training, and a whole range of other opportunities for the local community. And in a sense, it's a microcosm of the NJC. We built the internals to provide a multiplicity of functions. And those functions were determined in 2007, but they were equally relevant now, 14 years later. So I think that in some ways, this space and this room represents how we have held the need of the client, the need of the practitioner, and the need for amenity. And for people not to be cloistered away and to be able to be seen that justice is live and it is moving and it is dynamic, and that this space allows us to then demonstrate that on those days, but to then use it in other ways to build the strength of our local community when it's not being used as this AFM space.
Thanks, Cam. I'll just, sorry for skipping through some slides now, a few other shots of the AFM space for you. What I am going to do now is just, and I know we're getting close to our time, so I do just want to quickly touch on a particular court process that's been established that sort of demonstrates some adaptability over time, the young adult list. Kwan, can you just talk through, briefly about why it was created and the aims of these programs?
Thanks, Alycia. So Cameron and Rachel talked a lot about how the building has adapted over time for different needs, and the young adult list is sort of compared to the AFM space, it's an opposite of that, where we are adapting processes to suit a different cohort without having to change the space. So the young adult list started in about 2018. Our in-house community lawyers and corrections have observed a really gradual but significant increase in the number of young people presenting at court with serious criminal matters and involvement in family violence intervention order or subject to some sort of court order. There also appear to be an overrepresentation of culturally and linguistically diverse youth from refugees and immigrant background. The situation is actually quite unique to the NJC, as traditionally our main clientele has been those well into their adulthoods and male predominantly. And what we observe happening in the courtroom is echoing in other community forums. We had some consultation with local police, youth services, lawyers, corrections, and other stakeholders. And one of the proposals that came out of it was the implementation of a young adult list. The list manages criminal matters involving young adults aged between 18 to 25 and focuses on addressing the specific risks and needs of this clientele. The list aimed to enhance sentencing outcome for young people by highlighting the relevance of age, which result in a greater emphasis on tailoring proceedings and responses in a developmental appropriate way. It also aimed to resolve matters with minimal delays. As you can see, sometimes court can drag on and on and on for months, if not years. but we take into consideration that young people usually has a greater potential to make significant rehabilitative changes in a relatively shorter period compared to older adults. So the court list is aimed to bringing matter to finalization at a quicker pace. It also aimed to minimize potential mixing between the more seasoned offending population with the young people, because the list is occurs on a separate day from other court matters. It also aimed to have dedicated youth services on site to ensure timely referrals and continuity of care beyond the young people's engagement with the justice system. So yeah, the young adult list really showcases the fact that if a building is designed well, and if the principles of community justice are consistently practiced, there is little to no changes you will need to make for the space to work for different clientele. The young people often presenting at court are already comfortable and familiar with the space, because this is something that is very much part of their community as they grow up. They often will see their parents utilizing the space. Their parents could have attended programs at the NJC. They themselves had attended programs that is run by local agency at the NJC. They would have known somebody, either a friend, or there's some other community members that have engaged with the NJC at some point. So sometimes it's not about just the architectural change, it's about a psychological shift, even though you're using the same space.
Thank you, Kwan. I'm not sure how much more time we have left. So I was thinking that we could see if there were any questions from the audience at this stage, and if not, we do have a few we could go through as well. So we have one in the chat that is about adding cells to a building that wasn't designed for justice purposes and the considerations around fire and safety codes. Does anyone have any insight into that?
The cells were designed within our building, if that's the question, but I guess the question might be for in relation to an existing building in another location. And I think certainly the requirements from a municipal perspective would depend on the area that the building is currently in. But in our case, the cells were built within the building. But Cam, you've got your mic off, so you might have some more insight into how that was carried out at the time.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to Greg for the question, because it's actually it is a really interesting question about how it is we repurposed a building that wasn't built to meet the need that we wanted. In terms of the constructions of the cells, which are quite fascinating, there are quite specific guidelines that, in our case, Victoria Police has as to how it is that cells are structured and how it is they need to be specifically built, which then needed to align with exactly local fire and safety codes and ordinances. From an architectural perspective, what it also does really importantly, and we need to consider within the NJC, is it actually means that there is a cohort potentially of people at any one time in our building that are subject to very different restrictions to everyone else in the building. So in terms of evacuations, in terms of fire drills, in terms of how it is that space is managed, it actually represented, not just in terms of the cells, because the cells in some ways were easy to build because Victoria Police said they have to be built like this, and then they have to commission them to determine them to be fit for use. The more interesting architectural component is, okay, how do people get in and out of that? So how do they get in and out of it in normal times, and how do they get in and out of it under kind of significant circumstances of there needing to be an exit and a forced exit from the building? What's also interesting is that for our magistrate, he has a different exit plan under an evacuation than the rest of us, which potentially was going to potentially cross paths with people in corrections in custody who are also being evacuated from the building. So the multiplicity of need, and the cells particularly, are really important because it places a whole range of different constraints around how people move in and out of that space. The ordinance is relatively easy to comply with, but the practical architecture around enter and exit to it was quite different and quite more complicated.
Thank you, Cam and Rachel. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. And there is one around any empirical data to demonstrate the outcomes and lower recidivism. So I might ask Rachel to touch on some of the research that we have around the results of the centre.
Thanks, Alycia. Yes, there certainly is empirical data to demonstrate the impact of the centre, and we've recently built a new monitoring and evaluation learning framework to update that data. But independent research by University of Melbourne and the Australian Institute for Criminology has indicated that we do have better rates of client completion of community corrections orders than like courts, and we also have lower rates of reoffending. There is also some research indicating the contribution that the centre has made to crime reduction within the area. Obviously, been aware that there are a number of variables that contribute to crime reduction, but there's enough evidence to indicate that the centre certainly had an impact there. So yes, there is quite a lot of data and evidence available, which we'd be happy to share, of course.
Yes, absolutely. I can share those links with the conference organisers to get out to the audience. Another good question here as well. Was there any resistance from the magistrates about the change in their courtroom? So looking at a lower bench and redesigning that. Now, I'm not sure, maybe Cameron might have some views on this.
I did laugh when I saw the question. Yes, there were. There were quite significant concerns raised because there are effectively 5 features built within our court that are different to every other magistrates court in the state of Victoria. Whilst the modelling is based on the children's court, there's also no crest. So in every court within the state, there is a state crest. And part of that, the decision from the architectural perspective was to say, what we're doing in terms of the formality in the court and the authority of the court is not bowing to objects, actually bowing to the people that are making the decision making within. And we do bow when we enter court. We maintain formality in a very specific way. But there were concerns. There were concerns about safety. There were concerns about the authority of the court. There were concerns about it being too open. And as I said before, kind of with Rachel in the space, in the AFM space, part of what we then had to do was kind of be the vanguard in holding that concern. Now, after 14 years, we have the lowest rate of incident of any court within the state of Victoria. We have a level of authority that clients experience, which is about the relationship and engagement that we have with them. The dynamic of justice is not about, it's not about physical pieces. It's actually about the relationship and the relatedness of people and how they engage in that space. And that was going to be a big shift for magistrates. And my own opinion is that in other iterations of courts within Victoria, when you leave to magistrates the decisions about how they will be less formal, I don't think they necessarily know where to pitch that. And formality is in part physical and is in part kind of procedural and practical. So there was definitely some concerns that were raised, but we've been able to hold it. And what you'll see in the background, particularly this slide, is that is a series of visiting magistrates, one of the information sessions that we ran. And they do have an interest now in moving through probably of an older guard position of actually saying, how is it that you do this? And how is it you maintain the authority and respect and regard of justice in the court without having the physical features that we've kind of disavowed that authority to, but it's really about the people that are in that space.
Thanks, Cameron. I think that was a great answer. The thing I wanted to add just quickly as well is it was modelled off children's court magistrate benches as well. So the children's court did already exist with those lower benches for that feel of a courtroom as well. We have a question that sitting in education, I often get asked when I speak to groups of people, is are there any plans to expand the number of courts? Rachel, did you want to touch on this a little bit first?
I'm not sure if this question's about the courts in the centre or the number of community justice centres? Perhaps I'll answer both. We are anticipating funding for a second courtroom to be built within the NJC. The challenge we will have there is ensuring that whatever courtroom comes into the centre does not compromise the community justice model in any way. And so we have to continually work to resist a trend towards mainstreaming our community justice centre, when in fact what we want to do is mainstream community justice the other way. So on that point about whether the community justice centres are likely to be expanded or more of them in Australia, that's certainly something we are hoping for and working towards. But what we really talk about is the fact that there has been a lot of change made or brought about for other courts in Victoria as a result of what magistrates and judiciary and court administrators and bureaucracy have seen happening at the NJC. So we've definitely had an influence across Australia and in fact internationally as well. So we take pride in that, and it gives us the energy to keep pushing. But it's a constant challenge. Absolutely, it is a challenge, because the resistance to go with the mainstream approach is always there. And the last thing I'll say is what's different about this centre compared to other community justice centres in other parts of the world is that we are a court of first instance. So we are the local court for City of Yarra, and so we're not a court where matters are referred to. So we see a whole range of types of matters.
Thank you for that, Rachel. I have a few questions I've prepared to ask for the panel. So since there are no others in the chat at the moment, I'm going to ask, I guess, the elephant in the room question. How has the NJC actually adapted to COVID-19 and the pandemic, with community being at the forefront of what we do? I'll go to Rachel first. How has it coped during the lockdowns?
Yeah, thanks, Alycia. Look, we think we've coped very well. Given that we've got a fairly flexible staffing structure, it meant that we were able to respond very quickly. So we had a lot of flexibility among the way staff work anyway. So staff were able to work from home. Everyone had their devices. So that made it quite easy for us. In terms of the community, we took on an emergency response role, if you like, to support the community through the initial months of COVID response. So the local government in our area was very busy dealing with setting up their own services and responding. So we took on the role of convening a COVID-19 emergency response network and had a number of multiple agencies within the area and other government departments would meet on a fortnightly or weekly basis initially to talk about what was happening in their communities with clients, how we coordinated response from material aid to changes, new programs, sought funding as a group, etc. So we played a really strong role, I think, in helping the community respond to COVID, and believe we've done that pretty well.
Cameron, for you, what was that impact, knowing that you and your team very client focused?
I suppose, and I agree with everything Rachel has said. I suppose one of the things that we're very lucky to have the building that we have and the way in which it was designed by Cameron Lyons 15 years ago. The multifunctional space itself, the fact that we have rooms that are of varying size, we could accommodate very different conditions within the kind of the rolling restrictions that have been attached to our response to COVID-19. We were able to develop in our smaller individual interview room spaces, broadcast points for our clients to be able to engage with the transition to remote delivery of service, not just from ourselves, but from the broader community. Then when we had need to be on site and there was ability to have clients on site, our larger rooms allowed us to continue to deliver a service, which was transitioning back to face-to-face under socially distanced conditions. The flexibility built within the centre structurally about different rooms with very different sizes and very different capacities, all of which are, IT capable, was really it was significant, in the sense it was fundamental in our ability to transition to a remote model of delivery to a cohort of people that aren't necessarily as IT equipped, or in an equitable sense, IT able to access as the rest of the community. Often we have people coming out of custody or engaged in the justice system, or just really in a kind of a disenfranchised position that didn't have the smartphone capacity or the laptop capacity to engage in remote delivery of service. So we were able to provide that broadcast function at the very early components of our COVID-19 response from the centre. That adaptability has ensured that we've been able to continue to support people through what has been a really difficult time for everybody, and a transition to a remote model of delivery that didn't then leave people behind.
And Kwan, you were on site for much of the pandemic, and in Victoria, we've been locked down for quite some time. What were some of the impacts you've seen, and how was the space able to adapt to that?
Thanks, Alycia. I think what Cameron was saying, the adaptability of the building, it's really evident during the pandemic. I'm going to harp on about the outdoor space inside the building again, because that was, again, a really important space for us during the pandemic, where staff is still able to see clients in those outdoor spaces that significantly lowered the health risk for everybody. That is often not possible in other courts and in other centre, where traditionally a lot of court is built with very small interview rooms, and that's all you get. The NJC also have a very diverse, I guess, size and different function, where, we have rooms that fits 2 people. We also have rooms that will fit a whole community in it. So those spaces are really well utilized in the pandemic, where social distance is really important. It gives staff and clients a level of comfort that they're coming into a space that it's not going to compromise the health. But also, like Cameron said, because the centre is designed to be used by the community, and that's why we have so many different rooms for different functions, we're able to allow clients to come in and use the facility during the pandemic. If we have a different focus where, we're only catering for a specific group of people, then potentially we won't have those number of amenities to help clients through this difficult time.
Thanks, Kwan. And look, we've got 1.5 minutes left. So I will very quickly just ask, what is one element each that you would change about the centre or have done differently? Kwan first.
Look, I think one thing we do like to improve on is the custody area. It is a little small, a little cramped, and it's also, not a great future-proof design, because we only have 2 cells, and with our increasing number of clients in and out of custody, due to legislative changes, it's often a really difficult situation to juggle. But because of the limits of where the cells is built, is now really costly to expand it. So it's a solution that we're going to have to really work on in the next couple of years.
Cameron, quickly, one thing you would change.
I think one of the things that I would change is something we're currently contemplating doing, is what Rachel talked about, possibly having a second courtroom capacity. To be able to provide a more responsive justice system to our community, and potentially, if we can, provide the model more broadly to other people, because we know the benefit that it can deliver.
And Rachel, one last thing from you.
Yeah, just really having it more open to the community after hours and weekends. So I'd love to see some young people events, some, running a live music thing, or that sort of thing, just making it more accessible when we're not using it, which is a lot of the time.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you to everyone on the panel. So Cameron, Kwan and Rachel, and thank you so much to the Academy of Architecture for Justice for Conference 2021 for having us here today. It was really lovely to be invited to submit to present, and I think we've all really enjoyed this process. We hope that this discussion today has emphasised the importance of engaging the community in the design, the ability to be flexible, and future-proofing the design for anything that can happen in the years to come. If you would like to learn more about the NJC or have further discussions about our model and how we work, please take my contact details down here. Welcome to email me at any time and we can set up some conversations. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.
Alycia, thank you so much. And thank you, Kwan and Cameron and Rachel as well. We're just so pleased that you could join us on a very, very early morning and share with us your success. It's very inspirational to us to learn about a new building type that we can promote here in the US. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.